All right, well, it is that time of year again. Families are hitting the stores hunting for the best bargains on backpacks, notebooks, their child's favorite cartoon character on a lunchbox. Well, in a new report out from Deloitte, inflation is driving this year's spending up another 8%. Let's unpack this with Rod Sides. He's the global leader of Deloitte Insights. It's great to see. When I look at this survey, my big question is, obviously, we're in the face of higher inflation. It still seems, though, like parents are willing to spend. What was your big takeaway from this survey?
Yeah, absolutely. What we found is that parents are looking to make sure they make the back to school season really work for them. They're dipping into savings. Savings rates actually down a little bit as we go. People are looking at things like buy now, pay later. And so they really are trying to step up on behalf of the kids as they go into this back to school season. So again, we're seeing about an 8% growth in K-12 and about 10% in college. So parents are stretching beyond their means in a lot of cases.
And those numbers, when you break down per K through 12 student, is more than $600 per student, which is some eye-popping numbers. How do you break down that number, and what's the biggest chunk of that spending?
Well, what's really interesting is apparel plays a big role in tech also, but we saw tech as a category start to cool. What we found in the last 2 years was tech spending was way up as folks were trying to get their kids educated from home. Now what we're seeing is a pretty big decline there, but those are big ticket items. So that does make up a big part of that. Apparel looks like it's going to be the big winner. And what we found is a lot of folks are looking to make sure the kids have the new clothes, et cetera, because they're not going to be on camera as much. And I think there's a little catch up there in terms of that particular category. So it's interesting to see that move this year specifically.
And what are the strongest categories you're seeing amongst college-age students?
Well, tech is just the opposite. So in that case, tech is the number one category. We're continuing to see that to grow fairly dramatically. And it makes sense as kids move into college. You know, a lot of the K-12 has been provide the device. And I think there's a lot of reason why they did that. It's kind of a bring your own environment as kids go to college. And so as a result, we've seen tech continue to grow there. And I think there's a number of stores, the tech stores are going to do quite well with that particular category.
Hey, Rod, what about certain stores, certain brands? We talk about Gen Z really being attracted to those companies that place an emphasis on sustainability, on the environment. Is that the case with some of these parents who are buying the items for their kids?
Yeah, that was one of the biggest surprises this year is we actually saw parents' desire for sustainable products really grow. And about 50% in both the back to school and the back to college categories said that was going to be important to them. But what's really interesting is that for those parents, on average, they spend about 22% more in the back to school. So they're willing to pay more for sustainable products.
One number that really stood out to me was that parents plan to spend 49% of their budget in store this year, up from 43% a year ago. Is that a reflection of a return to brick and mortar, or rather just distance from the pandemic?
I think it's a return to brick and mortar to a certain degree. If you go back and look at where we were in 17 and 18, back to school was largely an in-store type of experience. About 57% back then were in-store versus online. Now what we found is coming out of the pandemic, the convenience of having your kids try on those shoes and clothes, et cetera, really makes the store the right answer for a lot of parents. Now, we also know that digital is going to continue to grow, so it's not going away. But I think we are getting back to some level of normalcy as we go into this season.
And which retailers do you think are really reaping the biggest benefits of this right now?
Wow, that's a great question. I think what we normally see mass do really well. They generally lead in almost every category, and I think they'll do fine. About 81% of respondents said that they would shop the mass category. Online only, we saw go up fairly dramatically as well. But what's really interesting this year with apparel is we're seeing returns to department stores and specialty clothing. So both are back to the point where they were about 4 years ago in terms of number of folks who are going to shop those venues. So I think the department stores are going to have a nice rebound, if you will, coming off the pandemic.
Rod, what about the supply chain issues? Is that affecting when people are ordering? Because we certainly saw it play out last year around the back to school time and certainly over the holidays. Has that kind of brought some of the back to school spending forward?
Well, what's really interesting is that when we asked the question, about 63% said they were really worried about the stock out type issue. However, when we looked at when they're planning to shop, we're back to the same curve that we were pre-pandemic, and certainly from where we were last year. So the peak period will be the next 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks of July, and then it'll trail off the first 2 weeks of August, et cetera. But the curve looks almost exactly the way it did before we got into the pandemic. So parents are saying one thing around worrying about stock outs, but at the end of the day, it looks like they're going to shop at the same time.
And Rod, obviously, it's been an incredibly tough few years for students of all ages, for everyone really, but specifically for students. What are you seeing in terms of perhaps spending when it comes to things to support mental health as the kids return back to school?
Well, thanks for asking that. That was one of the first questions we asked this year because we just know how stressful it's been on families over the last 2 years. And so what we know is about 50% of the parents, both in the back to school and the back to college, said they're worried about their kids' mental wellness, et cetera. And 36% have already spent on products to help with that. So whether that be online meditation, whether it be extracurricular activities, yoga classes, et cetera, we know that parents are investing. But the interesting thing about it is that investment will last all year. So I think there's an opportunity for retailers to message that they understand that, well-being and mental health is really important throughout the balance of the school year. And there's opportunities to address that for sure.
Indeed, an important point, and a trend we certainly see coming out of COVID. Rod Sides from Deloitte, thanks so much.